trying to get back to reaching my dad in Manhattan was next to impossible because the phone lines were so busy with incoming and outgoing calls of people letting people know that they were safe, people trying to find out where people were. Uh, he described the sky as black looking. He's 50, 60 blocks north of the World Trade Centers and describing how empty the streets of New York City were, except for emergency vehicles heading from north to south and to get down to the lower part of Manhattan.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
So, where were you 20 years ago?
I'm sorry.
September 11th, 2001. Where were you 20 years ago?
Yeah. I was in my office in Mississippi State. So I think the first plane hit, well, it was about 9 o'clock Central Time when we saw it. So, and somebody informed the office what was going on. And I'm not sure. I think, like everybody else, I think I saw it being played back rather than, because it surprised the entire country, right? So anybody who saw it who wasn't in New York outside of the building saw a playback of the video of the first plane. I've seen a number of different angles of that plane going into the tower. One of them, for some reason, they were filming first responders. And now they're using that video behind an interview of him. I forgot which one of those, all these 911 shows that are on right now. But he was the battalion commander for that borough. And for some reason, there's a lot of video of him just going about his job. And it just so happens that while they're taping him checking out a gas leak on one of the streets, they happen to be at an angle where they caught the plane in the sky. And in every one of those angles, except for the one that apparently was taken from another high rise, all the other angles show how noisy that plane must have been, as low as it was, even though it hit the 100th floor of the tower. That was much lower than people hear planes from. As a matter of fact, you don't hear airlines in New York. There's
not over New York City.
Not over New York City.
Yeah.
So everybody looked up
because
of the noise before the plane hit.
Right. So you were going around about business as usual.
I was also preparing to bring Nicole out to California. We actually had scheduled to drive her out here. She had entered an exchange program and Doris and I we're driving her out here the next day. And so I only spent half a day at work. And then the rest of the time I spent trying to buy gas and hook up a U-Haul. And suddenly gas doubled in price because the rumor started that we were at war. And Columbus Air Force Base was 20 miles away from Starkville, and that they were going to ration gas. And all of a sudden, there's this long line of people getting gas because of a self-imposed rumor, with no thought of the fact, why would anybody take gas from Starkville? Because the Air Force Base doesn't need gas for jets. And the likelihood of our jets being involved in any kind of reaction was pretty low, especially since most of the terrorists were on the plane. And we didn't know who did it.
So that was the year that you were in transition from Mississippi State to Western?
No, that was the year my daughter was in transition.
Okay. So she was out here before you were?
Yes.
Okay. The concept of Driving, you weren't concerned at that point
Oh, you mean because of the
because of the plane, because of 9/11.
because 911? No,
Yeah.
no. Of course, I was concerned about
Hmm.
what was going on, and I guess I may have been somewhat concerned about whatever arrangements we might have made, but we were driving,
Right.
so I didn't see it impacting our plans. And of course, I guess I should have been concerned. I was more angry than anything else that I was about the sharks taking advantage of the situation and increasing gas prices. I do remember one station that the station that I normally use, which was mostly for convenience. I used it because it was the cheapest gas in town. And then to just watch those gas prices go up almost on a 15, 20-minute basis was annoying. And then I ended up going to another service station that I did a little shopping in. I noticed their gas prices hadn't changed, so I got in line. As I got up to the pump, the owner was standing out there trying to keep everybody calm and making a comment that his prices were his prices. They weren't going to change. When he ran out of gas, he would have run out of gas. I think I was the next to the last person to get gas before he ran out. But from then on, as long as I was in Starkville, I used that service station because of his values, because of his commitment. But where were you?
I was asleep in Irvine. My dad called. My dad lived on Manhattan, 58th Street. And I don't remember if he was at the office or at home. And he called. So it was about 6:30. And we actually had landlines back then. And he called and said, New York's under attack. And my dad's a joker, if you're wondering where I get it from. And I said, by what? Cicadas? Because I remember growing up on Long Island, and yeah, the summer was cicada time. He said, no, turn on the TV. So flipped on the news. You had a holy cow moment with what's actually going on. And so the kids were, it's 2001, the kids were 4 and 7. I think one was getting ready to go to preschool, one was getting ready to go to first grade or whatever the case may be. And I had the TV on when they were down for breakfast when the second plane hit, at which point I turned the TV off because I didn't want to have to over explain, clarify, because they'd been to New York City. I don't know if they would recognize, the World Trade Centers and everything, but they'd been to New York, and I didn't want them worrying about their grandfather, et cetera. So I don't recall whether we got a message about the schools or whether we went there and they sent us home or whatever the case may be, or whether they took the kids and they, tried to put them through some normal day. It just seems like a blur. It was so long ago. I had sold the practice, I had left practice, and I was working from home doing consulting and other things. And you got wrapped up in the TV, just watching what was going on and listening to the discussions and trying to understand what was going on. And they had the World Trade Centers, they had the Pentagon, they had the field in Pennsylvania where the other plane went down. And it was chaos, from what I recall. At one point in time, I went to the gym, did a workout, and then sat on a bike and watched the news for a while. I probably had some conversations with people at the gym and tried to wrap my head around what was going on. Trying to get back to reaching my dad in Manhattan was next to impossible because the phone lines were so busy with incoming and outgoing calls of people letting people know that they were safe, people trying to find out where people were. He described the sky as black looking. He's 50, 60 blocks north of the World Trade Centers and describing how empty the streets of New York City were, except for emergency vehicles heading from north to south and to get down to the lower part of Manhattan. He probably walked home. Again, I don't recall where he was at that point in time, but and just describing this eerie feeling. So his house was right by the 59th Street Bridge, which takes you from Queens to Manhattan. et cetera, and that there were people trying to get home. You couldn't drive because everything was kind of blocked off from a security standpoint, and just watching people crossing the bridges. I had drinks and dinners at Windows on the World, which are at the top of the World Trade Centers. I grew up watching them being built. So it was and still remains totally surrealistic as to what occurred. And looking back in California, I didn't feel immune that we couldn't be next. I felt concerned that if they're going after New York and DC, that Los Angeles could definitely be a very significantly targeted area. So you start to think and worry. And then it was just really trying to stay in touch with my dad and just find out what was going on and make sure he was safe. And we were able to do that through various modalities eventually. But looking back, just trying to wrap your arms around everything over that day and the next few days. And then, with planes, no travel going on. And I'm not sure where I was headed, but I know I had some trips planned, and schools being closed, and trying to communicate with the schools as to what was going on. I think it was just very different and difficult to understand until more news came through and you started to get a much better understanding of the details and the breadth and depth, and just watching that second building collapse like a house of cards. I mean, literally watching it live on TV, you're speechless. There's nothing that you can say. There's just nothing you can understand. And yeah, I mean, it was just one of those days that you just never will forget where you were and what you were doing.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.